Good evening and welcome to News Review. A 29-year-old man pleaded guilty this week to the unlawful possession of indecent photographs of children and to 5 counts of voyeurism. Colin Fisher had been employed as manager at the King's Bowl at the Leisure Centre.
The police arrested Colin Fisher last Thursday following an extensive investigation by officers of the RGP Safeguarding Unit and in conjunction with Interpol USA. Fisher was arrested on suspicion of being in possession of and distributing indecent photographs of children and taking and publishing indecent photographs of children, as well as voyeurism. Following his arrest, Fisher was interviewed under caution in the presence of his lawyer, Francis Borrastero Porter, pending further inquiries and forensic examination of storage devices which had been seized during the execution of a search warrant at his residence. Yesterday, Fisher was arrested once again in relation to further offences and again interviewed under caution, but this time he was charged. After spending the night in police cells, Fisher was transported to the magistrate's court. There he pleaded guilty to 1 count of being in possession of 47 indecent photographs of children and 5 counts of voyeurism. The voyeurism charges relate to the covert recording of 3 different female co-workers within the changing rooms at King's Bowl. These recordings were taken without their consent and for Fisher's sexual gratification. The case has been committed to the Supreme Court and adjourned until the 17th of April for sentencing, although the investigation is still ongoing and the RGP has not ruled out bringing further charges against the defendant. In the meantime, Fisher has been remanded in custody.
And later on in the week, the Royal Gibraltar Police confirmed that no children from Gibraltar are featured in the paedophilic material seized. The police said there was no evidence to suggest the images were taken in or around Gibraltar. The government this week commenced action in the Spanish courts for the rectification and correction against the Spanish daily newspaper Abitha. It followed the publication of a front-page cover and an article about the rock on the 23rd of February. The government said the article made a series of claims against Gibraltar which were wholly inaccurate and defamatory and were therefore damaging to the reputation and name of Gibraltar. The government said it was not prepared to tolerate this kind of journalism and called for a correction and an apology.
Well, I thought that the front page of Abitha some 2 or 3 weeks ago now was absolutely outrageous. It was an abuse. It was just a concoction of lies about Gibraltar. We see this very often. We've taken detailed legal advice in Spain and detailed legal advice in Gibraltar. Charles Gomez Chambers has been advising us about the substance of this issue for some time. They've been looking at all of the negative press that Gibraltar has received in Spain and how that is engendered in a particular way by the statements of the Spanish government and what it leads to. And we are now convinced that there is an opportunity here to demonstrate that to a fair and impartial tribunal which would then decide in favour of Gibraltar. Will we get a fair and impartial hearing in Spain? Well, put it this way, the jury is probably out on that, so I wouldn't hold my breath for a positive answer, but certainly the advice tells us that we should, if matters were dealt with objectively, if they were dealt with fairly and at arm's length without any politics creeping into it, the Gibraltar case would succeed, and the terrible libel and defamation of the people of Gibraltar and Gibraltar as a whole on that front page would be something that Abitha would be required to rectify.
Also this week, the Office of the Chief Secretary revealed the government opposed the UK's unilateral decision to take over the printing of Gibraltar passports every step of the way, but was powerless to stop it. It followed the introduction this month of the new arrangements. Gibraltar variant British passports, as well as those of the other overseas territories, are now printed by the UK Passport Office instead of the territories themselves.
A fortnight ago, passport counters at the Civil Status and Registration Office were closed for 1 day to ensure a smooth transition to the new arrangements. Number 6 said that according to the UK Passport Office, the change will increase security and create new efficiencies. It's clear, though, that the Gibraltar government doesn't agree. In response to our questions, A spokesman said the UK has offered no compelling explanations as to how this will be achieved. The government has never accepted the argument that centralising passport personalisation in the UK makes the process more secure. It points out there have never been any significant security breaches in the overseas territories, whereas, on the other hand, one reported significant breach actually happened in the UK. Number 6 has no doubt the new generation passport with improved security features could have carried on being issued here, and reveals that it actually offered to pay for any resultant additional costs in order to retain the printing locally. The government has confirmed this matter was discussed regularly by the overseas territories themselves, and also at joint ministerial council meetings with top UK government officials from the Home Office and the Foreign Office, where opposition to the initiative was expressed in the strongest of terms. The Chief Minister, Fabian Picardo, also personally made his strong opposition known to visiting officials. Number 6 has confirmed that the word Gibraltar will still appear on Gibraltar variant passports, highlighting this was something on which it was always very insistent. In addition, the Civil Status and Registration Office remains the issuing authority, which means the decision as to whether or not a passport is issued remains with the Gibraltar authorities. New passports will continue to be valid for 10 years, and validity terms and fees will always be determined by Gibraltar. The UK will send new passports to the local office for collection, unless applicants request it be sent to them directly. The government does not consider this UK initiative in any way diminishes or undermines Gibraltar's status as a self-governing territory. It says our status is not affected by what are ultimately just logistical, if unwelcome, arrangements.
The government has started detailed negotiations with two of the parties who submitted expressions of interest for the East Side project. The Chief Minister's office is now negotiating with these two bidders, both of whom are from outside Gibraltar.
Number 6 Convent Place says this negotiation represents the prospect of huge inward investment into Gibraltar over the development period of the projects under consideration.
We are talking to the two that we think are potentially the best out of the 6 that we had whittled down the original 13 applications from, but we are not yet down to do. We want to talk about the details of the applications that they've submitted to the government, the projects that they've submitted. We want to ensure that these are the right projects for Gibraltar. We want to look at the types of heads of terms that are agreeable before making the award. If we cannot reach the right determination with any or either of these two, then we may move on to others of the remaining 4 applicants. So we're not yet down to 2, and it may be that we can find in the remaining 4 applicants another applicant that we want to include in the plot.
The Chief Minister says all 6 proposals were potentially very exciting projects for Gibraltar, and now his office needs to finalise details to ensure that the final deal is the best possible one. He says the government is making sure no issues are left outstanding which could cost the community dear later on.
The Civil Service Union, GGCA, has requested an urgent meeting with the Chief Minister after a large majority of its members voted against plans to restructure the Human Resources Department.
The GGCA claims the government intends to divide the department into 2 teams, each with its own director, and that it wants to make the Chief Minister's private secretary on industrial relations, Michael Crome, the director of one of them. This is opposed by the union's committee, which considers a non-civil servant should not jointly head the HR department. At a general meeting last month, the GGCA leadership outlined its concerns and resolved to ballot its members by an online poll. The results indicate that 9 of every 10 civil servant is against the restructure proposal, whilst a massive 99% support the view that the department should be exclusively staffed by civil servants. 93% said the HR department of the civil service and the government's agencies and authorities should be kept separate. The GGCA sees this as a strong mandate and wants to discuss this with Fabian Picardo, who's the Minister for Industrial Relations.
The GGCA's former General Secretary said this week he was determined to fight his unfair dismissal complaint against his former employer to the bitter end. In a statement, Michael Tampin said he was relieved by the Gibraltar General and Clerical Association's decision to withdraw its initial defence that he was over the age of 65 when dismissed and as a result had no right in law to claim unfair dismissal. A report has been released on recommendations on Gibraltar labour law. Renowned employment lawyer Professor Keith Ewing and Daniel Blackburn, director of ICTUR, were commissioned by Unite the Union to prepare the report and held a press conference to reveal its findings. The report covers organising, recognition, bargaining, strikes and individual employment rights and enforcement. The approach has not been to map out each of these subjects in detail, but rather to critically evaluate the legal and industrial relations systems in the UK and Gibraltar. They have identified which aspects of UK law and practice would be most helpful for Gibraltar.
We liked what we saw in the sense that there is a system here, at least in the legislation, in the Employment Act, which makes provision for terms and conditions of employment, working conditions, to be made by what are called joint industrial councils. And so far as we are concerned, this is a very good model for setting terms and conditions of employment, because it's a model which involves the trade union, it involves representatives of employers. They set terms and conditions which apply to all the workers and all the employers engaged in a particular sector of the economy or a particular industry. And that's a good thing, because it means everybody enjoys the benefits of higher wages and better conditions of employment. Now, the only difficulty, I think, that we discovered is that that system may not be working as well in practice as it looks good on the paper, and or at least as it looks good in the statute. And what our recommendation would be, I think, is that steps should be taken to see how this system in Gibraltar could be made to work more effectively for the benefit of the workers of Gibraltar and for the benefit of the citizens of Gibraltar more generally. And indeed, I would go further and say that I wish we had in the United Kingdom a system for the resolution of terms and conditions of employment such as the one that is in the statute book in Gibraltar.
Meanwhile, in response to the Chamber of Commerce proposals on the payment of fees in any case brought before the Industrial Tribunal, Blackburn and Ewing said they were surprised by the proposals, which will, in their view, wholly disrupt the settled position of employment rights in Gibraltar.
The fee regime in the UK has been a mistake. We believe it's unprecedented elsewhere in Europe, and we believe it has impacted very harshly on workers. Some of the harshest impacts on the poorest, on women, and on those who are with quite low value claims. So it's an impact on some of the poorest in society and on women. There's been a 64% fall in hearings, in applications to tribunals in the UK, and an even more exaggerated effect in sex discrimination, where there's been an 80% fall in the number of applications. Now, we believe that shows a very unfortunate impact of the fee regime, and we are strongly opposed to this kind of policy being pursued because of the impacts on women, on the poorest workers, and we think it's a tax on access to justice.
Representatives of Unite were also present at today's press conference and said the Minister for Employment had revealed the proposal would not be implemented in Gibraltar. Also, findings and recommendations were already being carried out as a result of the report. A seminar was recently held with the Executive Committee of Unite, which they described as positive, and culminated in a meeting with the Chief Minister and the Minister for Employment. The GST opposition said this week it supported the government's legal action against the Spanish newspaper Abitha, but challenged Number 6 to go one further and pursue action for defamation against the Espejo Público programme. The opposition says members of parliament of both parties in government participated in the Espejo Público programme in Antena 3, repeating allegations about the Dr. Heraldi home. It says those allegations have been proved to be entirely unfounded by the inquiry. And we'll be back with more of this week's news after this break.